So welcome, Professor Ali Alraouf, and thank you for accepting our invitation at the Habitat Unit Chair of International Urbanism and Design at Berlin Technical University through our course seminar, Contemporary Arab Urbanism. And we have here a group of students. And we have also the rest online. And I'd like also to thank all the audience who are joining us. We have like 18. Yeah, okay. So please, Dr. Ali, you can share your screen. Perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Everybody can see the screen?
Yes, yes, but you can still go to the full screen, please.
Sure, sure. How about that?
Yes, great.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Hassan, for the wonderful introduction. And guten Abend for my friends, the students around you. I am so grateful for the invitation coming from Professor Hagman and Professor Hassan. I am so excited and interested in the whole seminar. I mean, the notion of contemporary Arab and Middle Eastern urbanism to be contested and tested and to create a dialogue around that, I think it's fundamentally needed. And hence, I really appreciate the program and the initiative. And as you rightly said, Dr. Hassan, the Middle East also is extended, and hence it was an excellent idea from you and Professor Hagman to have kind of different lenses to use to look at what's happening in the different zones of the Middle East. And in my talk today, I will try to elaborate on the notion of Gulf cities and how I see the impact of those cities in the Middle East. And particularly, I will shed light on the influence of Dubai. I want to also focus so much on Doha because I work and live in Doha for the last 13, 14 years. Time is flying. And also, I want to shed some light on what's happening in Riyadh. So the context, I think it's kind of familiar for the students after all these wonderful lectures and talks. And, you know, the Middle East extended all the way from Morocco to Iraq and the Gulf. And particularly when we talk about the Gulf, we are focusing on what's called politically and economically the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is basically 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Oman. Now, there are, in my opinion, 2 major perceptions, 2 major ideas constructed about what's happening in the Gulf, and particularly the notion of the spectacle of the Gulf, the notion of the desert, the nomads, the camels. So I want to use my lecture to go beyond this myth because it's well constructed up even to this moment. I still meet people in my traveling, and when they say, I just came from Doha, Qatar, they would tell me stuff like, oh, but you're wearing normally. You see what I'm saying? So it's pretty interesting. And also I want to go beyond the notion of, well, these guys, they have money. I mean, it's also one of the very strong common constructed perception. They have a lot of money, they sell oil, they drive Ferraris and Maseratis and Rolls Royce and so on and so forth. And I think particularly this perception was structured in a lot of movies and a lot of artwork that was suggesting that this is the essence of Gulf countries. But yet, if you look at the history of most of those cities, number one, you will notice a couple of things depicted beautifully in this image. Number one, you see that there is a specific architecture an urban heritage which is so much connected with the context and respecting the environment. And at the same time, you see on the right hand of the photo a very interesting relation with the water, a very interesting relation with the Gulf, because as I would elaborate later, it was the backbone of their economy. And the same argument can be extended to the rest of Gulf cities, traditional Gulf cities. You can see that in Jeddah, in Manama, in Muharraq, in Dubai, and so on. This is Dubai in the 50s, and you can see very simple life, and I would say even it was very harsh life, because imagine all of these kind of struggles to maintain your life and to maintain the relation between people and families and communities in such very tough time. And then there was a fundamental, crucial change resulted from the discovery of oil. And for Gulf cities, that was the fundamental transformation. And it was a fundamental transformation because instead of fishing and doing pearl diving, suddenly they have a lucrative revenues coming from selling oil. I love this image very much, and I called it the icons of modernity. I mean, you see the Bedouin, you see the car, you see the pipe, the oil pipe, and you see the plane. And you imagine that all of this took place in a matter of months, right? So you can imagine the impact of such change on a very primitive societies. But not only the discovery of oil was a major change in terms of the economy and revenues, but also so much related to the notion of urbanity, the notion of creating settlements. So for the very first time in the history of Gulf cities, they were moving from the edges of the water because, as I explained, the economical relation was related to traveling for fishing and pearl diving to where are we having the oil wells? And therefore, here, for instance, this is an interesting photo that was taken in the 20s in Dhahran city, which one of the major cities in Saudi Arabia now. And this is how the city started, with a very simple early camp. If you are interested in novels and how creative writers have the ability to capture the essence of change, I would recommend for you Cities of Salt by Abdurrahman al-Munayef. Absolutely a masterpiece. And he used his creative abilities in writing novels to show us the impact of such a very quick and speedy change that took place not only culturally, but physically, socially, economically, and so on. Another interesting novel, I love novels very much. I wrote a whole book about novels and architecture. But another novel that was not translated, but maybe Dr. Hassan later, I will send him a copy for you guys to elaborate on. But this novel was written by a gentleman. His name is Hamoud Souq, which is basically a fake name because the novel was abandoned from entering most of the Gulf cities, and it's called Tsunami, right? And you guys know Tsunami. So again, it's about change. But what was interesting in this novel is that from the very first couple of pages, Hamoud Souq, the author, drew a very dramatic image in 2195. He is visualizing the Bangladeshi embassy in Riyadh with hundreds of Saudi people waiting in line to get a visa to travel to Bangladesh, to Dhaka, Bangladesh, to work as drivers. Now, this is very, very dramatic. And then later in the novel, he will elaborate on that, suggesting that this might happen. This might happen if we don't have oil anymore. So I would argue that this novel was a wonderful big red flag telling people in the Gulf, telling decision makers in the Gulf that the post-oil paradigm is coming, and you don't want to end up with your young people waiting in line to get a visa to travel to another country that you used to bring drivers and domestic help and so on and so forth from to work as drivers. Yes, Gulf cities are in transition because they started to realize that post-carbon paradigm is coming, and particularly for our domain, architecture and urbanism, we need to question the notion also of post-oil city, how we can move to a more resilient, equitable, it's sustainable, and so on. And you know, it's not only about the depletion of oil or the prices, but it's also so much related to what's happening in the world in terms of renewable energies. And I think Germany and Berlin and every single city in Germany, and I've been to a lot of places in Germany, and I can say clearly that you have a lot of examples in Germany suggesting that we are approaching the post-oil paradigm. Now, what was interesting in this photo is that this is the very first solar plane that took a trip around the world. The first leg was from Abu Dhabi to Muscat in Oman. Two of them are Gulf cities. And the whole trip was done without using a single drop of oil. And ironically, as you can see in the picture, the plane was flying on top of all these glass skyscrapers that the oil money was used to do, and which is all of them without electricity, without oil, without air conditions. It will be really disastrous. So the notion of oil here is not only about the depletion of oil or the cheap prices, but also about relevance. Maybe we are approaching a new phase in the history of humankind where oil is not going to be that important, and hence the whole economical structure, the whole economical matrix of the Gulf would collapse. As Dr. Hassan said, I did plenty of research and writing about the Gulf. I have a total of 20 years of experience in the Gulf. And in my time depicting what is happening, I was able to see three main paradigms, which is very interesting if you look at three main paradigms in one decade. I mean, 10 years in the history of any city is nothing, but this is also very specific character, very specific trait about the jumping, the swift change in Gulf cities. And those three paradigms are basically, the first paradigm, I would call it Dubaification. The second one is related to the green rush and sustainability. And the third one, which is I'm so excited about, the knowledgeification and the rise of knowledge economy and so on. So the first paradigm, as the title suggests, is so much related to the impact of Dubai and how Dubai became a model for development using iconic development and real estate fantasies and so on and so forth. Green rush and sustainability is related to sustainable movements, and knowledge is related to the rise of knowledge economy and so on. So yes, Dubai did a great job in terms of convincing the Gulf that we have a new approach to urbanity, a new approach to development. And this approach was basically a matter of we want the whole world to talk about us. We want to create a brand. We want to market the city. And how you can do that better than doing palms and doing the world map project. So all these projects that you can see on the top of the image are projects which I called it in my research the real estate fantasies, a project that would look like a palm only if you are flying on top of it. Or the world map is deconstructed into a number of islands, and the top millionaires of the world can get an island which is representing part of the world, and so on. And literally that was also in the philosophy of the rulers. This is Sheikh Mohammed, the ruler of Dubai, and plenty of interviews. He was even comparing Dubai to a company, and he was talking about how we have to create this level of success and bring people and create a brand, and this brand should be used, and how to do whatever it takes to keep people talking about Dubai. And to be very honest with you, the model was duplicated in a lot of cities around the world, the Gulf. In the lower part of my image, you see a comparison between Doha and Dubai. When Doha started to follow the steps of Dubai, particularly when it comes to vertical development and real estate fantasies. And what was interesting also, that at that time, Dubai, one of its major slogans was build it and then they will come, which is totally against the notion of sustainability, totally against the notion of who is your target group, what kind of community you are designing for, who are the people that you are conducting a conversation with them to be able to create a good piece of architecture and urbanism. But that was not important because Dubai at that time, they have the financial resources and they want to build skyscrapers, huge malls, huge entertainment parks, just to keep people talking about it. They did create a very interesting spectacle. These are some images from Sheikh Zayed Road, which one of the top locations for skyscrapers. I think it's one of the top locations all over the world, right? And you know, of course, the Burj Khalifa and the rest of the very interesting skyscrapers. But what is interesting for us, because we are more excited about people. We are more excited about communities. So when you go down from the level of the spectacle to the level of the street, sometimes you are shocked with the quality of spaces, the quality of transportation, the traffic jams, and the lack of spaces that would create intimate relation between the different community members. Another interesting impact of Dubai was what I called it in some of my research also, the fallacy of regional urban competition. Who will build more, bigger, and higher? You see, in this image, I don't know if you can see my pointer, those two towers, this is Burj Khalifa, and this is a Kingdom Tower. And the Kingdom Tower was not built, but there's a wonderful story here. When they inaugurate Burj, the original name was Burj Dubai, and then there was a financial crisis. I will talk about it in a minute. And Dubai was on the verge of bankruptcy, so Abu Dhabi came and injected a lot of money. And for that, to appreciate that, they changed the name of the Burj from Burj Dubai to Burj Khalifa. But during the opening, Prince Walid bin Talal in Saudi Arabia asked, what's this huge party in our neighbor's backyard? And they said they're opening a new tower called Burj Khalifa. And he asked, well, what's the height of this tower? And the answer was, that's 880 meters. He said, let's call our architectural urban consultants today because I cannot accept that the highest tower on earth is in Dubai. It should be in Saudi Arabia. And therefore, they decided to go for the Kingdom Tower, which was 1 kilometer height, 1,000 meters. Again, due to financial issues, and maybe because of our luck, it was not built. Another impact, in my opinion, was the unprecedented rapid urbanization. And this is why when I talked in the beginning about the three paradigms in cities in the Gulf, I was basically considering the notion of the pace of development. These are two images of Sheikh Zayed in 2000 and after maybe 20 years. This is Doha in the 80s, and this is Doha after, again, 25 years or 30 years. Even around one of the most sacred places. And I also wrote a book about the urban development about Kaaba, Mecca, and again, extensive urbanization is happening. And this was extended even beyond the Gulf. And I took this image in Pakistan, where the new candidates for the presidency back in 2018, they were promoting that if I will be elected, I will transform Peshawar into a new Dubai. So Dubai was even used at the time. This is why I called it an urban brand. It was even used to promote a political presidency. And even in Cairo, one of the most sophisticated cities in the world, one of the cities where you see amazing layers of history and civilization, but they ended up with a vision called Dubai along the Nile, which is again showing us the impact of the Dubai model, the skyscrapers, the glass buildings, and so on and so forth. Now look at that. This is an image from a newspaper. I was reading a newspaper, and in the very final page, the last page of the newspaper, I saw this ad. And the ad was titled, Dubai's History Meets Its Future. So the black and white pictures are then, and the colored pictures are now. And quite honestly, I kept on looking at the two columns. And I felt that if you go through picture by picture from the lower part, you will see that in the old days, in the past, there was a harmonious relation between settlements and water, because people, they know the importance of the Gulf for them. As when you go to the right-hand side, we are doing reclamation on top of water. The column to the left, you see people celebrating that the fishermen are coming back, while on the right column, you see only a couple of chairs, and then you go on the top, you see a guy doing sailing, and then on the top, there's a kid playing. You see the huge difference between community versus individuality. The difference between all of us together versus only if you can afford. The difference between there's a sense of solidarity and sustainability versus consumption. So those also were very interesting comparisons to be conducted. And then the financial crisis hit Dubai big time in 2008 and 2009, 2008 and 2009. I look at an image like that, cartoon like that, and I am angry. I am angry because the same people that were telling Dubai, you are doing great, you are building wonderful city, this is a beautiful spectacle, people would come from all over the world, this is the real meaning of development. The same consultants and the same advisors, they were making fun of what happened in Dubai. And you can see here, the whole city is decayed in the background, and the sheikh is saying, well, they exaggerate a bit about the number of wives, and then I have 26 wives and 58 kids to support, and so on and so forth, right? Another interesting challenge is related to climate change, and as I said, all of the Gulf cities are so much portal cities, they're adjacent to water, and therefore the whole idea of sea level rise is fundamentally important. Heat waves and how to deal with it is also important. Water and the availability of water. So plenty of existential issues that should be considered not only on a strategic and political level, but particularly from urban planning and architectural level. Some of the projects that were done in the Gulf suggesting that we are on the right track. This is a master project. And I wrote an article called Oasis or Mirage, because this is a city that was delivered to us as the new utopia, the 21st century utopia. No energy consumption, no waste, no cars, and we ended up with a specific institute designated for some research, and the project is totally isolated, fragmented, unfinished. So this is showing us a very interesting example about the difference between slogans for real estate versus authentic concepts that we believe in it as a community, as a political system, and so on. The third paradigm is the notion of knowledgeification, and particularly if you guys are not aware of the whole philosophy of knowledge and creative economy, I just put here one of the interesting definitions, which in my opinion very much related to Gulf cities because of the fact that the stress here is not on having more, but on being more. I think this is so much related to my third slide, where I showed you that Gulf people, they have money, they have Ferraris, they have Rolls Royce, and that's it. No, the transformation now is that your contribution in the future of humanity is not that much related to how much money you have and to which extent you are consuming, but it's related to being more and how you use your brain and how you use your creative capabilities to contribute. Plenty of wonderful writers talk about this, and I would nominate for you a couple of books: The Rise of the Creative Class by Richard Florida, and in his second book also in the same direction, Who is Your City?, where he was talking about a new geography coming from the rise of the creative class, people who they don't have assets anymore except their creative capabilities, and therefore they're willing to cross the borders, they're willing to cross geographies, to go to any city that would nurture their creativity, that would allow them to practice, and therefore the importance of place is becoming very essential element in the competition between different cities. Another wonderful writer, scholar, I was just with him a month ago in Brussels, and he's all the time he's a wonderful person, but particularly this time we spent almost a week and we had a lot of discussions. He's full of energy, but you know what, he's talking about creativity all the time, so of course he's full of energy. But what was wonderful about Charles Landry, who wrote his classical book The Creative City, which is for the very first time in our modern literature about cities and urbanity and architecture, that a scholar would tell us that let's focus on the question of, can places stimulate us? Can places enhance our creativity? Can places inspire us? Can streets inspire us? And so on and so forth. And the accumulation of this resulted in a new domain of research and practice, knowledge-based urban development, which I think it's a new paradigm in planning and urbanism, and plenty of books and research and consultancies happening around the world. All of it is related to the place of knowledge and creativity in the competitiveness between cities. Museums are one of the manifestation of knowledge and creative economy, and you can see also a very interesting competition between Gulf cities to hire Norman Foster, Novell, Impey, and so on and so forth, to do different museums in the Gulf. This is the Saadiyat Island in Abu Dhabi, where you have the Louvre and the Guggenheim Museum. I think it's almost in the construction phase. Zaha Hadid also, the project is coming back, and so on. But again, when you zoom in, particularly in the case of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, despite the political debate that was really heated up in Paris regarding that we don't want to market our own identity by selling the Louvre, but despite that, one of the main conditions about knowledge cities and knowledge and creative cities is that those centers of creativity and knowledge and culture should be integrated within the city. And I think although the museum is a wonderful piece of architecture with, as you can see in the lower pictures, beautiful tapestry of light and shade, but it's segregated project, isolated and separated from the city. On top of that, also there is a lack of social justice, because once the project is isolated and you need to pay to enter the place, then it is a bit not related to the whole community, but related to the rich and sophisticated, and not to every sector from the community. Interesting universities also are happening all over the place. This is King Abdullah Economic City and University for Science and Technology. Now, what is interesting in this project, in addition to the fact that the project is focusing on being a knowledge cluster, focusing on innovations, creativity, and the new knowledge topics, but also they allowed women to drive in this campus. They allowed women to be without hijab in this campus, which at that time created also a very interesting conflict and a very interesting dichotomy and a discussion within the Saudi community, particularly between professors and students and what have you. Why you allow something to happen in a specific kind of place, because now you're treated it as a sort of a gated community. And if you believe in those concepts, why don't you spread it all over the place? Now, the situation is changing dramatically now in Saudi Arabia, and particularly when it comes to other issues that was very crucial to the religious and the political system before. It's becoming very blurred now. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, and this is, I think, still very open question, because I'm still writing something about that, but from a very hypothetical position. And I would argue that we are witnessing a very interesting shift now. I talked about Dubai, and Dubai was the brand, and it was a brand because of using all of these iconic developments and so on and so forth. I feel that we are witnessing a sort of a new transition from Dubaification, Dubaization to Saudization. Because when I look at a project like the Line, for instance, and you have a city extended throughout 200 kilometers with maybe a width of 500 meters and a height of almost 200 meters, and you imagine what kind of vision that was marketed for this place, and how people would live here, and what kind of urban context that will be faced because of the mirror that is covering those 200 kilometers from the two sides. And you would question, I think you will feel that it is a legitimate question to say, is it really a sustainable project, or it's a new addition towards branding Saudi Arabia, the Saudization process? And the same argument can go to a new project also in Saudi Arabia, in the heart of Riyadh, called the Murabba, or the cube, right? And again, it's very mega structure. It's almost a half kilometer by half kilometer with the height of a half kilometer, huge cube. And again, there are predicting that a state-of-the-art internal quality, almost a space-like kind of environment will be created there. And the question is still legitimate. Is this what we are doing to cope with the post-oil paradigm and the climate change and heat waves and so on and so forth? Or we are still in the process of making brands? Another very interesting question, if you look at the quality of architects and urbanists and planners doing all of these projects, you will be amazed, because you will also ask a very interesting question. Why these guys are not doing this in their own countries? why they are doing this only in Dubai, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and so on and so forth. For the sake of time, let me move now to Doha, and I will try to provide a sort of a critical narrative about the city. And I want to start with showing you how my mission is almost impossible, with all my due respect to Tom Cruise. Because Doha in 1998 was selected by Lonely Planet, which is people like in my age, from the older generation, from you guys, were not relying, when we do traveling, we were not relying on the internet at that time. We were buying books, and those books were coming from the Lonely Planet series. Absolutely amazing books, and it would give you a beautiful idea about the city or country. Now, Lonely Planet experts in 1998, they decided that Doha is one of the most boring cities on earth. Imagine that. So Doha, only 25 years ago, was considered one of the most boring cities on earth. And if I want to contextualize the city, very similar to what I talked about, this is Doha in the heart of the Gulf, with the land borders with Saudi Arabia, and the rest is a kind of peninsula, finger-like, and within the Arabian / Persian Gulf, if you like to. And as you can see in the image, very similar situation to what I described regarding the rest of the Gulf cities. Very humble architecture. The only verticality is because of the minarets. And again, the very organic relation between the settlement and the water. This is Doha in 1937, the very humble fisherman settlement. And this is one of the images, one of the very early aerial images that was taken for Doha in 1947. Very tough life, very tough life. The only economy was based on fishing and pearl diving. And you cannot imagine, I mean, when the ships would come back to Doha, it was a ceremony. It was a communal, ceremonial kind of occasion, because sometimes more than half of the people will never come back due to drowning or diseases or what have you. And also, if you zoom at the city, you will see again the very traditional kind of architecture, the courtyard houses, the small alley, the covered markets, different features that are echoed in most of the Middle Eastern and Arab and Gulf cities. The transformation took place during 1939 when they discovered oil, but they started to ship oil in 1947. And this is a very critical date, because this is the very first time in the history of Qatar to start receiving regular income. This is very important. And hence, when you see the lower picture, you will start to see again icons of modernity, the paved roads, the cars, even change in the architectural language because of some institutional buildings like schools and health facilities and so on. And the unprecedented oil revenues also paved the way to an amazing pattern, not only in Doha, but as I said before, most of the Gulf cities. Those are maps that I prepared showing you the frog jump, the frog leap every 10 years. Every 10 years, the cities expanded. And as I put here in my slide, a question mark regarding, we have to pose and ask question, are we developing in the right direction? Is this the future that we are looking for? Is this the pace is acceptable? If you want to see exactly what I'm talking about here, this is the traditional settlement that I showed you, and I said this is Doha in 1937. So this is the origin of the genesis of Doha. And this square is here now, if you compare it to the rest of greater Doha. So incredible urban sprawl, and this urban sprawl resulted in a couple of things. Number one, urban fragmentation. Number two, car is the solution. You have to keep on driving all the time. These are images that depicting the waterfront within 10 years. So the difference, the time difference between the four pictures is between 2 or 3 years. And you can see again the huge pace of development, but also you can see that this is so much related to the paradigm that I talked about, the Dubaification, the impact of Dubai. We need to build skyscrapers. We need to be similar to Dubai. The very first step in Qatar to hire a planning consultant to do a vision for the city, not the country, the only Doha, only Greater Doha, was done by William Pierre, and his major recommendation, because again, we were in the oil paradigm, we have a lot of money and so on and so forth. So his recommendation was, Doha is growing beautifully, but we need also new horizons for the development. So he suggested that more development should be done to the north part of the city and also to the depth of the island. And because of that, you can see again the pace of development. This is the Sheraton Hotel, which was used to be the highest tower or building in Doha. It's a hotel and convention center, and this is the hotel now, if you compare it to the rest of the development, again, which emerged from the Dubaification process. Yeah, this is a close-up of what I'm talking about. And this is also very similar to what was happening in Dubai. This is a project called the Pearl. And again, the assumption is that if you fly on top of it, it would give you the sense of a shell. And in the heart of the shell, there's a pearl, and so on and so forth. All these formal metaphorics used to interpret the morphology of projects. And definitely the vertical development, as I said before. Now, there was a paradigm shift, and this paradigm shift is due to different kind of reasons. Partially because of the financial crisis that I talked about, partially because of a new leadership in Doha, partially because of a new vision about what do we mean by development. So we started to say that let's go for an alternative. Doha is not Dubai. Building the highest tower, largest mall, or an artificial island is not the solution, right? And we started to sort of investigate this more, the challenge of branding Doha. Now, if you copy a global brand or global model, like what Dubai is doing, imitating Singapore and Shanghai and Chicago and so on and so forth, you don't have a value because you are a copier. And you neglect your culture, and you neglect your architecture, and you neglect your urban history. And if you copy Dubai, you are copying the copy. So again, you are a loser because you are not really adding anything and you are not respecting what you have. So a lot of brains were gathered in think tanks, particularly in the domain of architecture and urbanism. It was done on different levels in Doha, but one of which was architecture and urbanism, to start to create a different model, to create different assets. And those assets are so much related to the notion of authentic identity. And by saying authentic identity here, I'm not talking about the history, I'm talking about nostalgia for the past, but I'm particularly talking about identity within the notion of knowledge-based urban identity for Qatar. So doing that would require historical assets and heritage should be respected, the natural component in the environment should be protected, how to promote the ability of the city to host mega event, how the knowledge-based urban development would change the face of the city, urban diversity, the notion of urban tolerance and city for all, and the notion of integration versus segregation. So we don't want to end up with a fragmented metropolitan city. So connectivity is crucial key word here. We want to limit the urban sprawl because we know that if you keep on doing the urban sprawl, you cannot escape fragmentation, you cannot escape relying on cars. And we have beautiful history in our Middle Eastern cities and Gulf cities suggesting the importance of compacted cities. But also we have wonderful literature from abroad. I mean, Richard Rogers talked about this almost 40 or 50 years ago when he was talking about the notion of compacted nodes where living and working in leisure would be connected together. So this is a concept that is coming from our heritage and also substantiated by contemporary scholars. So that was one of the major changes to be done in the city, moving from a sprawling city to a multipolar centralized cities, meaning that you want to create independence, yet you have the overall tapestry of urbanity of Doha. Another important direction is how to convince the richest people on earth, Qataris, who are driving Land Cruisers, Maseratis, Porsches, and so on and so forth, to move towards public transportation. So transit-oriented development became fundamentally important in Qatar National Master Plan. We know that it would reduce traffic. We know it would reduce carbon footprint, promote healthy life, encourage workability and social life, and so on and so forth. But the challenge was, the main question was how to convince people to do that. And I will elaborate on that. One of the elaborations was based on the notion of the urban centers and how to divide now the city. The city now is not only metropolitan, fragmented, sprawled, but how to divide it into different urban centers. And those urban centers, they have hierarchy from a capital city center all the way to a local center. But all of them are connected to public transportation, metros, buses, pedestrian routes, and so on. And here are the distribution. This is the vision of the new metropolitan Doha based on the availability of urban centers. Each of those urban centers, you have transportation node, mixed use development, green spaces, commercial activities, and so on. Another level was focusing on Doha downtown, the central part, and how to make to go towards the notion of connectivity, as I talked about it before. So, number one, you know the different zones, and you know the different characters of those zones. What's cultural, what's recreational, what's heritage, and so on. And then you create the connections, particularly by using green spaces and green streets and shaded areas, and also by public transportation. Another important transformation was based on how to transform Doha into a model for knowledge-based urban development. So we became not that much excited about having Burj Khalifa or Burj Dubai or the highest skyscraper on earth in Doha. But we are more excited about museums, research centers, libraries, and so on. One of the top examples that some of you might heard about it is Education City. Education City is a huge project right in the heart of Doha, where you have top universities coming from different places in the world, Georgetown, Texas A&M, Virginia Commonwealth, and so on and so forth. And all of this is available to the people, to the city, to the community. And to emphasize this more, some community facilities were added to allow people to come on a regular basis and not to transform the place into a gated community. So two main parks, Oxygen Park and Quranic Park, are part of the project. The main library, and I will talk about it later, the main national library is also in the project, and one of the top beautiful city mosque is also there. So all of these activities and definitely metro stations and so on. So all of this is again attracting people and preventing the project from being a gated community. And the architecture that was used in the project, done by very good number of architects, but all of them received a very, very solid message. We need architecture that would stimulate the minds. We are not into functional buildings. Yes, educational buildings and student facilities are by notion very rigid, but we want a new architecture that would respect the environment and also would stimulate the minds of students and researchers and visitors and so on. This is the College of Islamic Studies and the mosque that I talked about attached to it. And if you are familiar with the shapes of the mosque, you would realize that this is new in everything. It's questioning everything, questioning the notion of the minaret, questioning the notion of the dome, the notion of the relation between the form and the outdoor green spaces, the community park, and so on. So every single building, almost every single piece of architecture is used as a platform, as a manifestation of the notion of knowledge and creative paradigm. Now, all the Gulf cities that I talked about, when they have the oil boom and they have unprecedented financial resources, all the local communities abandon the heart of their cities. This is a pattern that took place in Kuwait, in Jeddah, in Doha, in Bahrain, you name it. And they moved to the suburbia because they wanna live in villas. They don't want to live in courtyard houses anymore, right? They wanna get rid of this chapter of their history. If you look at what happened in Kuwait, for instance, and parts of Doha, they literally bulldozed part of the cities because of one justification, that these parts of the city are reminding us of poverty, are reminding us of the bad times. Although these are fundamental and crucial chapters in the narrative of the city. Now, one of the great projects that was done was how to do a holistic revitalization to this heart of the city. But when we do that, we want to do it knowing all the lessons that we have learned, and also doing that in a more futuristic manner that would respect notions like walkability, the importance of public spaces, the importance of relying on renewable energies, and so on. This is some of the diagrammatic sketches showing the move in thinking, the conceptual move from scattered urbanity, where you have to use the car, as you can see in the left-hand side, versus the compacted urbanity, where it's more mixed-use, integrated, where people can promote walkability and use of public transportation and the importance of public spaces and green areas and green corridors. Another interesting issue related to the language of architecture and how to look at your heritage, to understand it, to analyze it, to learn from it, to be inspired from it, but not to copy it, not to imitate it literally. And here you can see a lot of effort that was done to be inspired by the past and create something new for the future. That was exactly the exercise that most of the architects in Masharab were subjected to. You learn about the context, you learn about the heritage, you learn about the vocabulary, but you have to come up with a new poem, with a new sentence, with a new melody. This is the project now, as you can see in the model, very similar to the urban fabric that I talked about when Doha was a very traditional settlement. Some of the old projects that were preserved there to be transformed into different activities for youth and cultural places and schools and so on and so forth. So as if the project is a representation of cultural continuity also. It's not about our contemporary moment, but you are connected to the past. And again, the importance of public spaces, particularly during the good weather time, you allow people from different nationalities and different backgrounds to interact and penetrate the place. It's not gated. It's not exclusive. I love this picture because it shows exactly what I'm talking about. That if you look at the foreground and the background, and in the background is the outcome of this Dubaification / globalization / what have you. But here, this is picture from Sharab towards the waterfront, and you can see the change and the transition and the transformation that I'm talking about. We're not excited about towers anymore, but we are excited about creating different quality of life. In 2010, there was another important transformation in Qatar. Qatar submitted a file to host the World FIFA Cup in 2022, and they won it. They won it. So in 2018, there was another historical moment, which I called it passing the ball, and they gave the ball to Qatar. Right, there was also a ceremony suggesting that now the responsibility is in the hands of Qatar to do the FIFA 2022. Now, again, speaking of think tank and the importance of planning for the future, in 2010, Qatar won the bid. In 2018, the responsibility were fully transferred to Qatar. In 2022, Qatar was even 2 years before 2022 fully prepared for hosting the event. But the question was, and then what would happen after? The question of the future, the question of the impact of hosting such an event on the future of the city, the future of the country, the future of people living there. And hence, we started to create what we called it an alternative narrative. A narrative that is based on the notion of how to use the opportunity of hosting a global event as a catalyst for a better future. This is extremely important, particularly if you look at some other cases where we actually send teams. I personally went to Moscow and I went to South Africa. Some colleagues went to Brazil. All of this because we want to test as a first-hand experience how the local community felt about hosting events. And we were so sad in situations like in South Africa or in Brazil, where people after the event felt that all their dreams were shattered and they were felt betrayed. I mean, I remember a discussion in South Africa where local community representatives told me we felt betrayed because we ended up with some hotels that we cannot afford even to walk by it. And the stadiums are becoming the drug dealers' kind of headquarters, and all the promises about prosperity and investment and working opportunities and employments and so on and so forth vanished. So the idea was how to subscribe to a new paradigm of cities or a new philosophy of cities hosting global events, which is based on the event serve the city, not the city serving the event. And this is, to me, very, very important and crucial, because I think the old school was based on the city would do its utmost capacity to create or to host an interesting event within a week or maybe 2 weeks or 1 whole month, like the case of the FIFA. But I think the new philosophy should be, no, it is not enough to do a wonderful job during the competition. The real challenge is how, from the early beginnings, to be fully aware how every single step you are doing for hosting the event has a positive future impact. So we started to consider what we called the legacy pillars. One pillar was related to the stadiums, wonderful stadiums. One was designed by Zaha Hadid, another one designed by Norman Foster, one wonderful creative local architect, Ibrahim Al-Jida, designed Al Thumama Stadium also. But the idea here was, once the competition is over, yes, some of the seats will be transported to some other countries to help them to have sports facilities. But more importantly, how each of those stadiums would be a catalyst for development within a specific urban context. So each of the stadiums were allocated in a place where the stadium will be a sort of an urban energy, will inject a new urban energy within the context. And as you know, a lot of activity, a lot of stadiums now around the world are not only designated for sports activities. You have concerts, you have markets, you have bazaars. Even in Qatar, we do a lot of weddings in the outdoor, and the stadiums can have a lot of ceremonies and weddings and so on. Another issue is related to urban transportation, and I talked that we want to move to transit-oriented development, and we want to convince people in Qatar to abandon their cars. You cannot do that without creating state-of-the-art public transportation that would cover the whole metropolitan Doha and would take you all the way from the airport to the different main destinations that you want to go. Universities, entertainment, residential areas, schools, different museums, major hotels, major commercial centers, and so on. And as you can see here, literally state-of-the-art, 4 lines covering the whole area with excellent stations. Me, this is a key photo. Key photo in the sense that I know that those 5 guys here, all of them, they have Land Cruisers. Some of them, they are driving Porsches. But the fact that these guys, and I took this picture and I'm so proud of it, the fact, although all of them are doing WhatsApp or what have you, but I mean, the fact that they are using the public transportation is suggesting a sort of, I would say it's not evolution, it's a revolution to convince local people in Qatar to use the public transportation. This is what exactly would head us towards a more sustainable future. One of the interesting also pillars where creativity was manifested is the notion of accommodation, because you don't want to repeat the mistakes of Brazil and South Africa and build a lot of hotels, and after the tournament no one would use it. You don't have the capacity, you don't have the number of tourists that would do that. So a lot of new ideas, one of which is floating hotels, one of which is desert camps, and after the tournament, the ships traveled and the camps were dismantled, and no extra money was dedicated to this. We were thinking a lot about what people will do between matches, because Qatar is very small, and it was very feasible to a lot of spectators to watch 2 or 3 matches. Actually, there's a sports journalist. She was able to attend 4 matches in the same day, believe it or not, because of the proximity of the spaces. But we were thinking a lot about what people would do in between those matches, and how, again, as I talked about our philosophy, how to use this for the prosperity of the people, in the local people, and for the future. So we created the whole strategy for urban, open and green spaces, integrated again with a network of walkable streets. And this strategy is a national strategy. It's covering the whole domain of Qatar, and particularly focusing in Doha. And the main idea here is that we want to create a triumph for green and open spaces. We want people to go out. We want people to enjoy gardens. You cannot do that without moving again from the simple beautification to humanizations of roads and public spaces, and literally creating spaces for people, particularly shaded areas, green areas, the scale, the more intimate and human scale, bicycle routes, and so on. Plenty of spaces that can make, and we want to defy also the notion of people don't like to walk in the Gulf. They don't like to walk in the Gulf because as architects and urban designers, we were not able to create the appropriate places for them. But once we do that, people are enjoying walking. And they are enjoying walking because also we need to celebrate the multicultural ethics and the boundaries and the different choices. all of the Gulf cities, including Qatar and including Doha, they have people coming from literally every single part of the world. I mean, Education City, where I teach, and I showed you the project, we have people coming from 130 nationalities working as professors, researchers, students, and so on and so forth. So cultural diversity here is important. It's an asset. And hence, you need to design places listening to the voice of all these people, not only a specific sector or the influential and the rich and what have you. Plenty of public spaces that are scattered around different parts of the city, the waterfront, the heart of the city, the heritage areas, all of them are prepared for people to enjoy without any kind of classifications or without any kind of money, nothing. No money to enter, no entry fee, no exclusivity. Public spaces are places for people. And you have different quality of public spaces. Some of them are kind of community generated, like the beautiful people doing salah in front of the baraha, the public space in some of the traditional areas, or in the Souq, or in the gardens, and so on. If you want to see the impact of this strategy and also see an evidence of the transformation that took place in Qatar, this piece of land in front of the Sheraton that I talked to you about, that is one of the most important hotels and convention center and what have you, the plan for using this plot of land was to create one more tower like this. I think it was designed to be similar to Burj Dubai or what have you. Now, because of the new philosophy, the new strategy, the new understanding of the meaning of the built environment and the future of Doha, the whole project of the tower was cancelled, and this is the project now. This is the first part, and the second part where people are having a wonderful time. This is part of the Museum of Islamic Park. Plenty of star architects also came to Doha, and also this is a very similar pattern that we witness in all of the Gulf cities. They are hiring star architects. We want to bring people to star architects to our cities. I remember I had a discussion with Zaha Hadid when she told me, I was amazed in Dubai. They took me in a plane and they said, we want you to select the piece of land that you want your project to be in. And she said, oh, well, but nobody told me about the project. They said, and they told her, it doesn't matter. You select the land and you do the project and you do whatever. We want Zaha Hadid in Dubai. You see what I'm saying? So hiring or inviting star architects, to me, was a manifestation of a total surrender for the Western experts and neglecting the legitimacy of local dialogue, how to also be excited about the local knowledge. Let me show you some examples to manifest this. This is the National Library in Qatar, designed by Rem Koolhaas, and we had some interesting dialogues and interesting workshops. But the whole idea here was, we are not a library goers or museum goers in the Gulf and in the Middle East. So we need a different quality of spaces. We need the library to give the impression that it's a public space rather than the typical dull image of the library, which is don't talk, don't smile, don't eat, don't drink, I don't know what. We want people to walk, and then the entrance, as you can see here, will literally suck them into the place. And then when they enter the place, this is what they're going to see. People are relaxing, having fun, drinking, eating, listening to music, and at the same time, books are scattered around them. The same exercise we did with the museums. This is the Museum of Islamic Art, designed by IMPay. But then again, because of the local voice, we started to suggest the balance between the museum as a cultural place and the public space surrounding it, and how this public space can be also injected by activities, park, bazaar, concerts, and so on and so forth. And now the place is so vibrant, and because of the public space and the park are so packed with people during the weekend, they go to the museum as a byproduct of their trip, which is very, very interesting. This is the Qatar National Museum. This is my hand in some of the workshops where we were basically talking about the importance of keeping the old palace. You know, some of the star signature architects, when they go to context in the Gulf, the very first thing they will do, even before the arrival of the architects, they will bulldozer everything. They have to give them a clean, what they called it, clean piece of land. In this project, the local voice was crystallized to say to Novell, we have to keep the old palace because it's a representation of a specific chapter of the history of the city. And hence, your job as a creative architect is to do the marriage, is to respect and at the same time do the contradiction and to do this kind of dichotomy, architectural dichotomy. But at the same time, the relation between the project and the city is very organic. You can penetrate the project from every space and place. And you see the connection also with the waterfront. Even the boundaries are so blurred to the extent that you don't know if you are in and out, you are in a semi-public space, you are in a public space, you are in a private gallery. All of these boundaries are becoming so blurred to manifest the personality of the project as a cultural museum, cultural center museum, which is geared for the city rather than the cultured and the sophisticated. You see here the dichotomy that I'm talking about, the dialogue which is created between old and new, past and present, heritage and contemporary. As you can see here in the picture, this interesting ascending between the old, the contemporary, and the waterfront and the Gulf. And even looking at heritage, we started also to preserve the heritage, but with the notion that heritage should be preserved for people to use, rather than the negative preservation of restoration and you close the place. No, you do the conservation, preservation, but then inject it with life, create new rehabilitation projects for people to use and enjoy. So to make a long story short, I want to end up by saying that now we are working on Doha vision using all what we have learned and we have done, and we are moving dramatically towards people-centered architecture and urbanism. We want to keep on creating this balanced approach between a resilient future and relying on community participation. And when I say community here, I'm talking about everybody living rather than only locals. We acknowledge notions like smart and sustainable, but it must be just and resilient too. And the final point is that we need to preserve the national heritage and we learn from the past to guarantee a prosperous future. And thank you so much for having me. It was fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Professor Ali, for your I would say I don't know how to explain how to describe.
It was that bad. It was that bad.
Absolutely not. Actually, I like the way you smoothly took us through the Gulf cities historically, and also showing different phases and showing the impact of whatever historic context and historic activity, like incidences. And I would say, yeah, it's good to have all this in mind for us as professionals, and also for the younger generations to learn from all those lessons. And I wonder, I mean, yeah, I would like to, before I ask myself, I have a list of questions, of course, but I would prefer to give the floor to any of the audience. Anybody has? Yeah. Yeah, you have to come closer so we can.
So, I have a question.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Alles gut? Alles gut?
Thank you so much for the very interesting lecture. I have a question, but I don't know how well formulated it is. So if you don't understand, please let me know. I thought it was everything super interesting, and following your line of thought, talking about the Dubaification and the importance for Doha to thrive, to let go of this globalized urban model and stop trying to copy what happened in other places, because it won't be the solution. And then I was very fascinated about your Mission Impossible. And when talking about the paradigm, thank you, paradigm of involving events in the city. And I came to question, how can these two things combine? Because I'm Brazilian, so I went through all the complications of the World Cup that happened there at the time, and I saw the frustration and how badly managed it was and how badly developed it was. And I found the division of the pillars extremely interesting as a matter of solutions and approaches of this massive transformation made for one event to be made for the whole urban sphere. And then I came to question, maybe if the pillars should be implemented not only after the event is held, but since from the early planning process, not something that happens, for example, in the case of Doha, after 2022, but something that already started in 2018. I don't know if that's clear.
Now, well, thank you so much for your introduction. And Brazil is a beautiful country. I love Brazil so much. I mean, it's one of the countries where you know the meaning of life there, literally. People are so alive. But I don't know if you remember my slide where I had 3 photos and a big question mark related to 2050. And in this slide, I was basically saying that since the moment of winning the bid for hosting the FIFA 2022, we started to formulate the question of, we are not going to invest only for the event. We want to invest for the future. And this is why all these pillars, some of them started in 2011, in 2012. These pillars, I'm not talking about these pillars that are steps that we will start doing now. All of this started a year or 2 after winning the bid. And therefore, when you talk about public transportation, for instance, in 2019, all the 4 lines of the metro were done. All of them, connecting the whole metropolitan city. So I see your point, but I was maybe I was not that clear that all these pillars, with the exception of the accommodation, of course, because the accommodation, the creative solutions, we did build some hotels, but the creative solutions like the floating hotels and the desert camps and so on and so forth, all of this was the brainstorming ideas that were generated maybe 3 or 4 years before the tournament. But all of this is the outcome of a decade of thinking, a whole 10 years of thinking.
So those pillars, I would rather ask, are they like documented in a certain like national policy or objectives? I don't know, strategies.
Yeah,
even yeah,
absolutely, Dr. Hassan. Not only that, I mean, to show you the level of commitment, even the name of the committee that was organized.
The question, I mean, who was responsible for that? Yes.
Yeah. I will elaborate on that in a minute. The main committee that was organized to supervise the whole process of hosting the FIFA, in the beginning, we called it the FIFA Organizing Committee. 2 years afterwards, we changed the name to the FIFA Organizing and Legacy Committee. Now, the word legacy here became a key word from 2012, 2013, that, as I said, the new philosophy is not about hosting the event, is not how the city serves the event, but the event is serving the city. And because of that, Dr. Hassan, we have number of volumes. All of these volumes are suggesting the strategy of the legacy in different kind of domains, one of which is the built environment, transportation, tourism, and so on and so forth. So all of this is very well documented.
Yeah, I mean, it's accessible that we can.
Yeah, I can send you everything.
Yes, I mean, please. This would
absolutely, absolutely. Sure.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and this committee, I mean, let me ask about this question, because I think it's important in this phase to know it. Who are the members of the committee? I mean, who were represented?
Sure. Well, number one, and I'm sure you guys in some of your discussions, you talked about Gulf cities and Gulf countries, and you know that all of the Gulf countries are ruled by families, right? So you have Al-Sabah in Kuwait, you have Al Saud in Saudi Arabia, you have Al Thani in Qatar, you have Al Khalifa in Bahrain, and so on and so forth. So usually the Emir is very important in the decision-making process. But when it comes particularly to this specific committee, the structure of the committee was so cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan in the sense that the leader was a young Qatari person, Hassan al-Dawadi. At that time, he was 33 years old, amazing person, very well educated, and he loves his country, very committed to the idea of how to make the event serving the future of Qatar rather than only the event. But then when you talk about the structure of the committee, you name it, because you have people related to hospitality, you have people related to planning, you have people related to architecture, transportation, security, sports facilities. I mean, you know, this committee for at least the last 5 years was the most important committee in Qatar. Whatever these guys would say, and I was part of it, of course, for specific issues related to urban development and project and the legacy concept and so on and so forth. But it was, in my opinion, it was so cosmopolitan, and you have subcommittees. So between the main committee and the subcommittees, I would argue that the whole world was represented, literally.
Okay, great. Okay, I have another question from here, and then we go to the questions that are online.
Sure.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Elnas from Iran, and my question is about Dubai. Because
you said what? What's your name?
Elnas.
Anas from where?
Iran.
Iran. Oh my goodness, I love Iran. I was in Iran 2 months ago.
Oh, for real?
Oh yeah. I went to Iran 6 or 7 times. I love it.
So nice. Okay, my question is about Dubai. I was there like, I think 25 years ago for the first time, and there was nothing there. And after that, because it's near to Iran, so we could go there easily. I think like, I don't know, 10 years later, I was there again, and so it totally changed. And now my question is, what happened to the heritage? What happened to the identity? And now I think there is no identity there, and you cannot understand where are you exactly. And my question is why, for example, we should have fake snow in Dubai, and there is a lot of opportunities that or potentials that we can use in this area. For example, there are a lot of great natures. Why we should make fake snow there?
Yeah. But this is what exactly I was talking about in the lecture, right? I mean, I covered a lot of what you're asking for during the lecture, but let me elaborate on something interesting that you said. You said that 25 years ago, I went to Dubai and there was nothing. I think this is exactly the problem, if you allow me. There were a lot of valuable things, but we were under the impression that we only look at what we feel is a manifestation of progress, development, and modernity, because all the traditional parts of Dubai were still there. But everybody was suggesting that we need development which looks like the Western world. And therefore, Dubai resorted to imitating the West. This is what I was saying. But now I would have to say that now, not only in Dubai, even in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, definitely in Qatar, in Kuwait. In Kuwait, they destroyed the old part totally. Now they are coming back to respecting the heritage. And as you rightly said, the question of identity is becoming a very interesting question now. But the question of identity here, not as a passive process in the sense that you would select a specific era in your history and you would say that this is the representation of my identity. Very similar to what we do in Egypt. Pharaohs. Identity, in my opinion, is a very dynamic process. Thank you so much. Excuse me.
Yeah, mentioning the heritage, I remember 2004. I was in Dubai and Sharjah. Back then, there was one, what you call it, Tabya, very small.
Fort. Qal'a.
Yeah, it was reconstructed, actually. I mean, it was demolished some years before. And back then, 2004, they recognized, well, that we have to reconstruct our heritage that we destroyed by ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the Msherab example that you have also explained to us, I think it has something to do with this. I don't know the scale. I mean, you mentioned a lot of activities happening and going on, but I think it was expanded somehow based on a core existing heritage building.
No, this is the core. No, Msherab is the core. This is the core of the old city. Other extended parts are not related to this core. But the whole core, as I said in the lecture, the whole core was abandoned because people, after the oil boom, they have money and they were, I mean, some architects would say that people would come, and that this is not only for Qatar, all the Gulf cities will come to their offices with pictures of villas in Florida and California. And they would say, we want one of those. You see what I'm saying? But in the case of Msherab, that was the core of the city, the old core. Msherab, the connection with the Souq, and the local community, the genesis of the traditional settlement of Doha was right in the heart of Msherab.
And this is the one that we see in your background, right?
Yes, it's Souq Waqif, the traditional market.
So it's another case that also has been.
This is cross the street from Msherab. They are so connected. This is the old part, and Msherab is the new regenerative development. But Souq Waqif was intact.
Okay, so let me go to the online in the chat. There is. Thank you, Dr. Ali. This is from Maher, Tansir, thanks. Muhammad Dabusi from Surrey University, thanks. No, okay, thank you, amazing lecture. My question is, do Gulf cities face challenges in maintaining a distinct cultural identity that has been overshaded since the discovery of oil, resulting in artificial urban development? Could a stronger emphasis on preserving and celebrating traditional architecture, incorporating sustainable design elements, and utilizing vernacular building techniques have contributed to the creation? Yeah, I think this is also something that you have mentioned.
Right.
And actually, this takes me to the, maybe question from my side, the role of Western or star architects, which has changed somehow. You mentioned also how they were given the chance to do whatever. In other cases, they were asked or given like certain task with the guidelines. We have to consider our own identity and our own conditions in the product. So I think this change of the relation between the client and the architect is important to consider, right?
I would rephrase this, Dr. Hassan, if you allow me. I would rephrase it in a sense that it's not about a relation between the architect and the client. It's about respecting the local knowledge. It's about respecting that I am Renzo Piano or Rem Koolhaas or Novell coming from a firm with the first class ticket reaching one of the Gulf cities, and then within 2 or 3 days, I will design for them. I think the confrontation that we were able to do with people like Rem Koolhaas or Zaha Hadid or Ayim Pei or what have you, that, you know what, you are a wonderful architect, you are extremely creative architect, but you don't know anything about us. You don't know anything about our culture. You don't know anything about our needs. Remember when I talked to you, when I said in the lecture about we are not library goers. No architect would understand this. No architect coming from the West would understand that there's a city building a national library, but at the same time, the community people, they don't go to libraries. But therefore, I think what we were able to do, Dr. Hassan, particularly when it comes to star architects, is to convince those architects that there is value in listening to the local knowledge and the local voice. And because of that, I remember Rem Koolhaas was telling me that he gave a lecture at the Canadian Society of Architects, and he started the lecture with the Library of Qatar, and he said, I have a specific vision about the library. I thought that I am one of the top designers of libraries in the world, but then I talked to the local people and I changed the idea and I changed the concept. And this is, I think, this is exactly what we need to do in the Middle East, in Turkey, in Iran, in Africa, in all of these places. We have to believe in the local knowledge. We have to believe that we have good architects, good brains, good designers, and we should not surrender to those big firms and star architects. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks a lot. Okay, we have two of our valuable guests also raising their hands, Professor Ahmed Al-Kholi, then Professor Al-Mu'taz. So Professor Ahmed Al-Kholi, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Thank you, Ali. Professor Ali, mesmerizing presentation as usual. I have 3 comments that might add to what has been said and might open discussion on different issues. First, about the claim that oil is not gonna be, it's not in the future. To tell you the truth, this is, I have doubts about it, because still research for renewables and getting them to substitute oil and other fossil fuel is not working yet. There is a movement towards greener, cleaner sources of energy, but still the cost, the prices, the acceptability, the applicability, all of that is there. For example, if you want to produce those solar panels, you need to raise the furnace to 1200 degrees centigrade. You cannot do that without oil. So when you bring your solar panels, you bring with them some kind of an environmental cost paid already upfront, and you need the time for that solar panels to pay the debt to the environment. So this is my first comment. My second comment is about reclamation of the sea. It's not just because of doing projects like the ones in Dubai. Actually, it's one of the precautionary measures to avoid sea level rise, because the level at the beach, the beach line, the coastline, is almost equal to that of the sea. Now, if the sea level rise, then some areas of the cities will be inundated, will be submerged. So that's one of the recommendations, is to raise those coastlines a little bit. However, turning it into kind of those projects that like Jumeirah and stuff like this, I'm not sure it's doing the job. My third comment is about the knowledge-based urban development. In my opinion, it rests on human resources, the management institutions. And if we look into the latest global innovation index report, I collected 5 countries from the Middle East: Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Israel, in addition to Iran. Now, the rank of Israel is 16 worldwide. The 4 countries, Israel, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, are classified as high-income countries. But when we look into the position of Qatar, it's the 52nd, Saudi Arabia 51st, UAE 31st, and Iran, which is under embargo for years now, is 53rd. Now, this says something about the human resources, about the institutions capable of generating information. It's not just about the buildings, it's not just about how much they spent on that. And that brings me to the point here within the third comment. It's about the issue of information availability and releasing such information for researchers to do their job. I've worked 7 years in the Gulf. I had, nightmares working with the authorities trying to do a project for them. They wouldn't release the data, and the data is not complete. So that affects your decision-making process. And last but not least, it's about the issue of human rights. Remember the fuss made about Gulf countries, how much the Asian labor have paid in lives and to build those marvelous buildings. Thank you, Dr. Ali.
Professor Foley, I think Dr. Ali, Professor Ali, can you please comment back?
These were 3 comments. They were not questions, comments, right, yes. Professor Ahmed?
مظبوط يا دكتور.
Yeah, of course.
Because there is a question also. I mean, it goes with the climate change point from Dr. Kloss, regarding the construction, the huge construction that happened in Doha or in Qatar in general, and how this was environmentally considered, or were there any environmental aspects into consideration while doing this huge construction? This was a question mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Well, in the old days, it was about building and building and building, because in this Dubaification phase, it was only about building. Yes. And you are exporting materials from all over the place, and you are getting labor from all over the place. Now, part of the qualitative change that is happening now is that in Qatar, number one, we have the GSAS, which is the Gulf Sustainability Organization, and they have standards that every single building is now subjected to it. We have the Qatar Green Building Council also with a lot of criteria. We have classifications. So what I'm trying to say here is that we cannot evaluate Gulf cities and Gulf states like very well-established countries, either in the West or even in the East, like Egypt or Algeria or Iraq or Syria, despite the political issues. But all of those countries, as I explained in my presentation, I mean, they started the modernization process 60, 70 years ago. So they were more geared towards building and developing and changing those cities. But now they are mature enough to introduce all of these environmental concerns. And as I said, particularly in Qatar, I think in Dubai or Abu Dhabi also, they have something called the istidama, which is again a sort of an evaluation procedure to examine the buildings and examining the impact and the environmental impact of projects and buildings. And we have this in Qatar via the GSAS and the Qatar Green Building Council.
Great, thanks a lot. We have also another, I don't know, question or comment from Professor Mu'taz.
Thank you very much. I've been waiting for almost an hour.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, for the presentation. It is really wonderful one as usual. Something I'm not really surprised. It is the same as usual, you know, so it is the same high performance. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
And thank you very much, Hassan, for this opportunity to have, you know, despite the fact that we have it at a short notice, but this is really great to be around. My point here, which I just want to raise for this kind of comparative presentation between the four cities or going through Dubai, Riyadh, sometimes we mentioned some stuff about Cairo, and then coming to Doha is about the nature of the decision-making process and who make the decision about the development. So if you look at all these paradigms, all these development is a top-down nature. There's some sort of disjuncture between the ruling authority or a ruling group who's really leading the country and between the people. People are always followers. The sense of the local communities, whether you're talking specifically, I can talk about two different experiences within the development, for example, of the 2030 vision in Abu Dhabi, which I participated in, or being in Qatar for some time as well, and sensing this between the locals and the students. And you can feel that, you know, they are driven by these kind of developments, which is coming by or imposed, let's say, by professionals and experts and the ruling group, but not really embedded in the country. So the real issue of partnership and participation doesn't exist in the four examples, and this brings all these kind of problems you've mentioned about the destruction of heritage in certain places, the shift towards modernization, all these kind of issues, you know, there's some sort of lack of involvement of the local communities. So this juncture is a problem. People are not really engaged in the process; they are followers, and this is a major challenge.
A comment or a question? Because if it's a comment,
No, this is not a comment. I just want to have the feedback from Dr. Ali about this, because all these examples, they are wonderful, but they are still top down. They are not really embedded within the community. So how you reflect on this? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Ali.
Thank you so much, Professor Al-Mu'taz. It's wonderful to see you and to have your valuable insights. Now, again, I want to put things in context. I want to put things in context in the sense that, very similar to my answer to the previous question, which is we need to acknowledge that the whole development story that we are talking about, the whole modernization story, narrative that we are talking about in the Gulf is within the last 60, 70 years. So when we talk about any concept like user participation and community participation, we need to understand that it's an evolution process. This is point number one. Point number two, which is fundamentally important, again related to the context, we are talking about tribes. This is a tribal order, even before oil. All the people living in the Gulf are related to a specific tribes, and in the tribes, hierarchy is fundamentally important. It's part of the ethics, it's part of the respecting the elders, and also it's religious. Because when it comes to Islam also, Islam is talking about concepts like Imam, concepts like Khalifa, concepts like the head of the family, and so on and so forth. So the interesting thing here that you're talking about, sorry?
And Surah concept as well.
Exactly. This is the point, Dr. Hassan, that you're talking about a context where everything was used to be from top down because we have a trust in the head of the sheikh of the tribe or the imam in the mosque. But now they are moving gradually towards that. Well, of course, when it comes to religious issues or what have you, we listen to the imam and we listen to the sheikh. But when it comes to designing places, when it comes to designing what would happen in the street in front of me, and I think the process started with what they called it the majlis. Majlis is a very informal kind of sitting within the Gulf. But now, in the Urban Planning Authority, for instance, in Qatar, those people from the majlis, they come and they have official meetings with the Urban Planning Authority to tell them that we had a meeting with the local community and they want 1, 2, and 3, and they reject 4, 5, and 6. So this is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that this is a rosy picture. I'm not saying that this is similar to what is happening in Berlin or Frankfurt or Hamburg. But what I'm saying is that we need to understand that there are signs of evolution. A final point regarding this, 20, 30 years ago, no one would acknowledge talking about expatriates in the Gulf. Yeah. The importance of creating places for expatriates, because every single planner would come with how I can serve Saudis, how I can serve Qataris, how I can serve Emiratis. Now, because all of these cities, they realized that our model is a global / cosmopolitan / creative model, we need to bring people from all over the world. And no one would come to you unless you respect his spatial needs, architectural needs, and urban needs. Thank you so much.
Sorry, but I just want to have a little comment, if you don't mind, about this point specifically about consultations. So what I meant here by my comment is that the dialogue and the understanding within the local community of these kind of shifts doesn't exist. The communication between the local authority and the strategy, whether we are talking about all the four cities, there's some sort of deficiencies here. People do not understand why we are doing this. This is what I meant by they are always followers. So this is the critical point, is that you are not part of the story. So this is the point. Thanks.
When you say, I don't want to go into a dialogue because I know Dr. Hassan has a short time. Okay. But when you say, Dr. Mu'taz, that you're not part of this, are you talking about the decision makers, or are you talking about the local community?
I'm talking about the local community. They are not part of the story.
But I just said that the local community now is having official meetings at the Urban Planning Authority to say this is what we need. So how come they are not part of the story?
Yeah, Dr. Ali, this is not about the strategy and the policy. They are just discussing. This kind of discussion goes for small little things. They are still looking about their needs and demands. But how I'm gonna move in the future, this is totally different from just urgent needs about decision about having a formal.
Let's agree that, I mean, in the whole region, participation is relatively not compared to the West, let's say. And when it comes,
this is fine. This is absolutely fine.
Yes, I mean, but starting this, I would say this is a good sign that probably, as Professor Ali mentioned, that this is a new actually thing that people are not used to to be considered.
Yeah, we can go for arguments, and I can give you examples about this. So there is no point, of discussion.
No. Just
I have, lots of examples. I know about how participation happened and how they set back. So this is the point, is that whatever we are talking about development, whatever we are talking about knowledge-based planning, still the locals are not developed enough to really be part of the story. So this is the dilemma here, is that you are driving the development very fast, but the local community doesn't really appreciate, doesn't have the chance to grasp this and develop in parallel. So the product would be really of a problem, because I've got a community at a certain level of development, and at the same time, the thinking and what's going on is really far beyond belief. So how we are gonna make this kind of, or fill this kind of gap between the locals in order to make them able or enable the local community to effectively participate and become creative. This is my point.
Okay. Let me say an example. I mean, from the city where we're talking from. I mean, Berlin. Yeah? I mean, participation is there. People are asked to participate and to give like attend meetings and give their opinions, and they don't participate. Sometimes they don't care. Sometimes they don't attend. The thing is that it is institutionalized. I would say this might be the way, if participation and community, let's say, listening to the community needs being institutionalized, then and only then this would be guaranteed that their voices would be heard. If it's not institutionalized, which is actually, of course, a developed step to have it inside the whole process, that no decisions can be taken without listening and approval of I don't know how many. Yeah. So this kind of institutionalization, if it's not yet there, it's still valid point that it started even. I mean, first it started, in some places it happens informally, in some places it happens like it's documented, but I would say not necessary that the decision makers listen to all what is mentioned. So the dialogue is not yet mature. Maybe also the pace of development is too fast, and the communication channels is not yet, I mean, I'm not talking about particular country, by the way, now.
I understand, yeah.
Different context, they have the similar conditions, but we have yeah, I think we have to stop the discussion. Ending, because there is a professor waiting, the dean is waiting for me for the room.
Oh my goodness, I don't want to be in the blacklist.
No.
The dean is here. Okay,
so
thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you very
much.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks, Professor Ali. Thanks the audience, and see you soon in another meeting. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you for having me.